Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, President Trump is scheduled to leave the hospital in about an hour and a half. His doctor says he may not be entirely out of the woods, but his condition continues to improve. This as 3 more White House staffers, including the press secretary, also test positive for the coronavirus. We will have a report from the White House this hour. Plus, San Francisco has kept cases and deaths below the rest of the state of California by aggressive sheltering in place. Mayor London Breed joins me for an exclusive interview as restaurants and places of worship start to reopen with her outlook on the city's new normal. And Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok trying to crack down on death wishes for the president, but conspiracy theories continue to swirl on social media. A sneak peek at our interview with the stars of Netflix's hit documentary, The Social Dilemma. But first, markets soaring into the green amid optimism that President Trump will make a full recovery and more progress on a stimulus deal. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle has been following all the back and forth for us. Investors, Abigail, liking what they're seeing, despite the president's doctor cautioning that he's still not out of the woods. But investors seem reassured. Tell us what happened today.
Certainly a risk-on tone for the day, Emily, right out of the gate. And the futures early in the pre-market also higher. So investors, whether they're reassured by President Trump's health status or the possibility of stimulus coming, plus the earnings season coming up, whatever the reason was, we had this risk-on appetite. And I say whatever the reason was because it could just as likely be fundamental, or excuse me, technical. Those are the fundamentals, given the sell-off that we saw on Friday, somewhat of a panic sell-off since it was never confirmed by Haven Assets. So in other words, a nice rebound rally on the day. The S&P 500 putting up its best day in 3 weeks, its highest level, closing at its highest level in about a month. And the other indexes, lots of big gains there too. That NASDAQ 100, just its best day in about 2 weeks or so, but even a greater charge there, really being helped out not just by the mega cap techs, but also the biotechs. Take a look at the biotech index closing up 4.4%, and Regeneron really soaring on the fact that President Trump is using their antiviral cocktail to help treat COVID-19, leading some analysts to think that there could be some sort of emergency approval of that cocktail. And all of this confirmed by the fact that bonds on the day, a big sell-off, the biggest sell-off in more than a month. So again, a risk-on tone to compete with Friday's mildly risk-off tone relative to just stocks. One area that's super interesting, Emily, related to the virus, we had a real sell-off in contrast to these gains for the movie theater stocks. And this, of course, is the UK Cineworld has closed its U.S. branch, the Regal Cinemas. That's the second largest cinema complex retailing brand in the U.S. AMC and Cinemark down sharply in sympathy, Emily, as it seems as though this is the lost year for movies.
All right. Lost year for many things. Abigail, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for that update. Now back to the president. President Trump indicating he will be leaving the hospital about an hour and a half from now. His doctor spoke with the press earlier, saying that while the president hasn't had a fever in 72 hours, it is not necessarily smooth sailing ahead.
Though he may not entirely be out of the woods yet, the team and I agree that all our evaluations, and most importantly, his clinical status, support the president's safe return home, where he'll be surrounded by world-class medical care 24/7.
Also today, we got word that 3 White House staffers, including Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, tested positive for COVID-19. With us now, our White House reporter, Justin Sink, for the latest. So, Justin, we're waiting for the president to leave Walter Reed in about an hour and a half. What exactly do we know as of this minute about his condition and how exactly this transport will happen?
Yeah, so I think doctors were pretty encouraged today as they were talking about his condition. They said he continued to improve over the last 24 hours, and he had sort of exceeded all the hospital's discharge criteria. So they think that, especially considering that the facilities at the White House themselves are pretty advanced in terms of the medical care that's possible, that he can continue the treatments that he's already on there and work to recover at the White House itself. He'll be taking a chopper back, as he took a Marine One there to the hospital. We're expecting that around 6:30 today. And the next questions are, of course, how this disease develops and continues to sort of progress with the president over the next 3 or 4 days. doctors have traditionally said that the 7 to 10 day window after somebody's first diagnosed, so for the president that was Wednesday or Thursday of last week, are the most crucial in how coronavirus impacts somebody. And so while they're, I think, very encouraged to the point that they're sending the president home, this is also going to be a pretty crucial period for President Trump.
Now, there was a lot of confusion, which led to more concern over the weekend about the president's condition. When he got tested, the president also leaving the hospital to greet supporters in a car, some controversy around him exposing the folks in that car. Now that we know that 3 additional staffers, including the press secretary, who you are hearing from on a daily basis, has tested positive, what do we know about new protocols at the White House? Can staffers keep the president in isolation as he is supposed to be?
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 questions there. The first is whether the president, who has really been itching to get out of the hospital and get back to work, is going to be able to stay maintained in the residence. They're working to create some environments in the White House residence itself where he can kind of work from home, quote unquote, without going into the West Wing itself. But I think there's going to be a struggle among staff to keep the president isolated because he's somebody who really enjoys seeing people. To your second question, obviously the virus is continuing to sort of ravage the West Wing itself and people who we interact with every day, including three members of the press shop that were announced today. And so we have seen today that fewer people came in and a lot more people are working from home, but there still aren't mandatory mask requirements. There's still not a requirement that if you can work from home, you will. Rather, they're just saying if you are experiencing symptoms, don't come in. There's still not mandatory daily campus-wide testing. And so there's a question, especially because the protocols that already existed obviously didn't work. The president's in the hospital right now, and 12 people in his inner circle have coronavirus. Why there hasn't been a greater effort by the White House to sort of change and improve the safety protocols that were already in place.
Exactly. And, there are still some questions. The doctor hasn't been forthcoming about the results of the president's lung scans, for example. Why is he on 3 drugs if, in fact, he is getting better? What do we know about the president's schedule for the next few days? We are now less than a month away from the election. Will he start campaigning again? Have they talked about that yet?
Yeah, so what doctors say is the first question is going to be when they can sort of certify that he's no longer shedding virus actively. And traditionally that's about 10 days, but they do feel like because they're monitoring him so closely, because they're using some testing, they'll be able to hone that in. It could be less, it could be more time. The next biggest item on the calendar is the debate next Thursday night with Joe Biden, and there's a real question, whether that's going to hit the window in which the president will go back out. Right now, his campaign is planning for him to do so. I think the president will be eager to do so, assuming that he's feeling well enough. But there's a lot of logistical questions about how that's going to work out and, how the president's going to prepare for that. Some of his top aides that helped prepare him for the last debate, including Chris Christie, who was sort of his debate sparring partner, Bill Stepien, who's his campaign manager, have also contracted the disease, and they're now working from home.
So many questions. We don't know how the next days will go, but I know that you are following every step of the way. Bloomberg's White House reporter Justin Sink there. And again, we are waiting for the president to leave Walter Reed Hospital, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. That is now less than an hour and a half from now. Coming up, a wake-up call why the mayor of San Francisco thinks President Trump's diagnosis could change people's perception on the seriousness of the disease going forward. My exclusive conversation with Mayor London Breed is next. This is Bloomberg. San Francisco was one of the first cities to shut down as the pandemic hit the United States, and an aggressive approach has likely kept COVID deaths down. San Francisco County accounts for 2% of California's population, but less than 1% of COVID-related deaths so far. That has come at a cost, though, including a big budget shortfall. Now the city is starting to reopen. Here's my exclusive interview with San Francisco Mayor London Breed about her plans.
San Francisco is in orange, and what that means is we're able to open more. We've been able to allow San Francisco restaurants to open indoors at 25% capacity. We've been able to allow churches to open indoor at 25% capacity, not to exceed 100. We've been able to give playgrounds a date certain of when they can open. We've been working with our schools and trying to help develop plans. So we're in a better place, but we also have to be very careful and to not move as quickly as people want us to move, mostly because we have to see what happens over the next 2 weeks as people start to move around.
The president, meantime, being hospitalized with COVID-19, another huge twist in this pandemic story. What are your thoughts on the gravity of this development as the leader of a major U.S. city?
Well, I just think, it's unfortunate when anyone gets COVID. And what we hope is that people are, especially leaders, are leading by example. I don't like wearing masks, but I wear them. I don't like social distancing. I want to be around people, but I understand that I could infect somebody and they can infect me. So it can't be about me. It has to be about the behavior that I model so that others can follow. They need to understand how significant this is and how it could basically be devastating to a densely populated city like San Francisco. And this is important. And so from my perspective, this is why from day one, I have tried to communicate everything I know and the facts and use data in the decision-making process of this virus. And just to remind people, yes, we want it to be over. We're tired of COVID, but COVID is not tired of us. And it's just not going to go away because we want it to. We have to do our part.
Now, many states and cities have been following the president's lead on this and reopened potentially faster than San Francisco did. And I wonder if you think the president's condition will change the way this plays out, change how some of these other cities and states are reacting.
Well, I hope it does. I think that, what it shows people is that no one is immune, that it can happen to anyone at any given time. And when you think about, someone who is possibly, elderly and maybe unhealthy, it could be even worse. The impacts of COVID could be devastating. So I hope that this is a wake-up call for so many people who are refusing to wear masks and who are moving forward with their lives as if nothing is wrong, as if we're not still in a pandemic. And this should be an example for sure.
We're heading into winter months, colder season. Are you at all worried that reopening in San Francisco will lead to a spike in infections and that you will have to pull back?
I'm definitely worried about the upcoming flu season and the concerns there because, at this time people start getting their flu shots, symptoms start developing for colds. And I think that what's going to happen, people might get it confused with COVID and there might be some challenges there. So we're definitely worried. We're going to keep an eye on it. We're doing great with our testing capacity. And so I think that it's important for us to make sure that our healthcare professionals are doing what they can to outreach and to communicate, with the public around, the differences. We've done a lot of campaigning around how to get tested, what you should be looking for, because the goal is we don't want people to panic, but we do want people to know that there's a flu and there's still COVID and we still have a responsibility. And a lot of our behavior is going to determine whether or not we are in a situation where we have to close.
Meantime, rents are falling sharply in major metropolitan areas and in San Francisco. How concerned are you about an economic slowdown in San Francisco, given that tech companies are paring back workers and people are leaving the city, and that means you're going to have a lower tax base?
Well, I will say that I'm very concerned. I just balanced a budget with a $1.5 billion budget deficit. And not to mention, there are over 200,000 people who have filed for unemployment in this city. We have businesses that I've been going to since I was a kid that have closed permanently. So I am definitely concerned about the economic impacts of what's happening. It's not about just tech companies fleeing, it's about business in general. In light of COVID and working from home and having more flexibility and the cost of living, and also the number of tax measures and other things that have really put us in a situation where I think we're going to have some challenges over the next couple of years. But the fact is, we're San Francisco. We're a major city, and people love coming to this city. They love working in this city. They love going to restaurants in this city. And so you can't just create this someplace else in a suburb. You only get what you can get from a place like San Francisco by being in a place like San Francisco. It's going to be hard for us for some time, but I think eventually we'll get back to a better place.
Now, some businesses and restaurants are saying, look, 25% capacity, the math doesn't work out. We have to bring staff back in. We have to pivot back from the delivery and takeout model that we've been, working on for the last several months. Actually, this could be worse for our revenue or make things more challenging as we're just trying to survive here. What's your response to that?
I'm not saying that we're going to take away the tables and the parklets and the innovative ways in which we've allowed restaurants to operate in San Francisco because of COVID. We're just adding additional space. So, for example, there's a restaurant that has put pretty much their entire operation outside. Their capacity is actually going to increase by opening 25% indoors because they have such a small space. But in other cases, it will be challenging. So we're not taking away anything, we're adding to. And so it is still probably going to be hard for so many of these restaurants, but as soon as we have an opportunity to allow them to open even further, then we will do that. And I want to also just mention, we extended the cap on the delivery fees so that the delivery companies, they can't charge more than a certain percent deliveries. It was supposed to expire as restaurants began to reopen indoors. We've extended that so that we can give restaurants more opportunities to recoup their costs.
My exclusive conversation there with San Francisco Mayor London Breed. You can catch more of that conversation online. Coming up, we are taking a look at why women are dropping out of the workforce at the fastest pace since the peak of the pandemic and why some are calling this a female recession. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Women are leaving the workforce at the fastest pace since the peak of the pandemic, with many schools and child care centers still closed. This, according to a new report by McKinsey in association with Lean In. The U.S. labor participation rate for women between 25 and 55 has dropped significantly since the height of the crisis. With us now for more, Lean In CEO Rachel Thomas. Rachel, always anxious for your report every year, and this one was particularly bleak, with women dropping out of the workforce even more. Sheryl Sandberg said if we had a panic button, we'd be hitting it right now. What should we be panicking about?
Yeah, we know women are struggling right now to balance work with everything else during COVID-19. But with this study, we understand the numbers, the scale of the problem. 1 in 4 women are thinking about downshifting their career or leaving the workforce. That's millions of women. So as Sheryl said, we should be hitting that panic button. If we lose those women, we will unwind all the progress we've seen in the representation of women in management since the beginning of this study and then some.
Meantime, we also got the last jobs report we're going to get before the election, which shows that the economic recovery could be fading, and we're starting to see the scars from the pandemic. How does that intersect with what you're finding out about women, what you're finding out about people of color and how they're faring in the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, we know that women are more likely to be furloughed and laid off. And then on top of this, the research shows women are more likely to feel forced out of the workplace. And 3 groups of women really show up in high relief as struggling: mothers, senior level women, and Black women. So mothers, we know that mothers are doing more at home than ever before, but on top of that, they're concerned their performance is being judged negatively because of their caregiving responsibilities, and they're right to be concerned. We know that we tend to think mothers are less committed and less productive. It's called the motherhood penalty, and it's in high relief right now. We know senior level women are facing the same pressures as senior level men, and then some. They feel like they need to be working harder, they're more likely to be burnt out, and they're more likely to be leaving the workforce. And then there's Black women. Black women already have a worse experience in the workplace. On top of that, they're disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And now they're coping with the emotional toll of all this racist violence in this country. And they're going to work day over day, and they are less supported. Just 1 in 3 Black women say a manager's checked in with them in light of recent events. And Black women are far less likely than other women to have allies. We need to do better by Black women.
So speaking of that, we've got the vice presidential debate coming up later this week. Senator Kamala Harris, there's never been a female vice president of this country, let alone a Black woman. After this election, there still might not be. So regardless of politics, what is at stake here?
Listen, both of those candidates are going to need to show up, and they're going to need to forcefully defend their opinions, their policy stance. They're going to need to be confident like we'd expect from any presidential candidate. The challenge is, as a woman, and particularly a woman of color, Senator Harris needs to be concerned about not looking too confident, not showing up as too assertive, people not falling into the trope of an angry Black woman as she debates. Vice President Pence, as a man, he is not going to face any of those complexities. We expect men to be bold, confident, promote their accomplishments. We expect them to lead, and so we celebrate them when they do. It's more challenging for Senator Harris.
Now, as the pandemic continues, and Rachel, we've got about 30 seconds left, how much does schools reopening, how much does that matter for women in particular?
It matters hugely, right? Like, women are being impacted by kids at home, school closures, things outside of their control. And that's why companies really need to show up right now for women and get creative. No one can be living up to business as usual standards right now, particularly women, and particularly the 3 groups of women we talked about.
All right, interesting, certainly, in talking with Mayor London Breed. You've got restaurants and places of worship starting to reopen, but still working on schools, which, as you say, so important. Rachel Thomas, the CEO of Lean In. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us, and I urge you to check out that report in greater detail online. Coming up, hate speech on social media, how Twitter, Facebook, TikTok are dealing with users wishing harm on the president. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. We are standing by for the president to leave Walter Reed Hospital about an hour from now. We've just gotten the official White House schedule, which shows that Trump will be leaving Walter Reed at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, arriving at the White House at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Time. We also just got some headlines from Vice President Mike Pence, who says he spoke to the president and that he sounds, quote, great. We are, of course, going to be monitoring the president's movements and any developments as we get them. Now, for months, President Trump downplayed the virus, and his message was, as we know, amplified across social media, putting not just himself, but the public at risk. I recently had a conversation with a few stars of the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, who have been sounding the alarm about the power and polarizing forces of social media for an upcoming edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Here's reaction to the president's diagnosis from Tim Kendall, CEO of Moment and former director of monetization at Facebook, and Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Technology.
The fact that all of this information is coming to us through Twitter and social media, and the fact that a bunch of people thought, probably in the QAnon world, that this was a conspiracy theory, and it's actually part of Trump's double fake to then have the deep state cabal come back and win. I mean, the weird ways that you see people walk away with completely different perceptions of reality from observing the exact same thing shows you just how much the virtual realities in our own mind are at having us interpret even the same quote unquote facts. And so I haven't actually looked very deeply at how this particular, disclosure left, but I think this president being the first one to use Twitter as the predominant communication platform and the ability to control the financial markets and the attention cycles of the global media has had very, negative consequences.
So the president testing positive for COVID after playing down the severity of the disease, not wearing masks, Twitter and Facebook being a huge platform to advance these views, misinformation about COVID running rampant on social media. What do you think the connection is between his diagnosis and social media?
I mean, I think the president has made a habit of saying things just to say them, and I'm not sure we can interpret, any authentic desire to do sense making and find out what's true from his behavior. As he said, I think that I don't want to alert people, or I don't want to scare people by telling them what's true. And he was mocking the coronavirus as being completely fabricated, and then switching to having to talk about it as real. I really don't know what to make of it.
Tim, what do you think? I mean, so many people have been walking around in their social bubbles, half of us thinking one thing, half of us thinking the other, half of us thinking that it is a big problem, it is a disease that we need to be careful of, and the other half thinking it's not. Did social media play a role in that?
I see it in my own family. I have people in my immediate family who have a different view and a distorted view of the coronavirus, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's only because of they've been radicalized by social media. My reaction when I heard about Trump having the coronavirus is that I thought it was misinformation.
A common reaction I have heard, that was Tim Kendall, former head of monetization at Facebook, former president of Pinterest, as well as Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Technology. You're going to see more of that interview in an upcoming edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 later this month. Sticking now with social media and its role in this pandemic, the president's role on social media in this pandemic. Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer, who of course covers social media for us. Sarah, since the president came down with COVID-19, there has been a rise in death wishes for him on social media. Twitter and Facebook have been trying to crack down on this. What exactly have they done?
Well, it's been very interesting because both platforms say that they will take down wishes of death for the president. However, they got a lot of pushback, especially Twitter got a lot of pushback for that, because although that is against their rules, it's not really a rule that they enforce quite well when it happens to somebody who is not a public figure. A lot of people, you have spoken with them, Emily, they have constant death threats on Twitter, and nothing happens. So I think that there was a lot of especially immediate response, either making fun of the situation, tweets that got posted, and people deleted themselves later because they realized there could be consequences to having that kind of sentiment out there. On Facebook, they are especially taking down ones that tag the president. On Twitter, it's just overall not allowed. Not allowed is very different than saying enforced against. Right, a lot of these platforms we have gotten used to them saying something is not allowed, when in reality we can look with our own eyes and see that this kind of content is very prevalent.
Meantime, you and I have been covering the role of social media in society, the pitfalls, for a decade, but you've got now Netflix out with this hit documentary called The Social Dilemma, with folks like Tristan and Tim, that has gotten a lot of people's attention. Facebook has now come out with an official statement in response to The Social Dilemma, which is quite unusual given all of the coverage that Facebook receives and how big a part of our lives it is. They've said we should have conversations about the impact of social media on our lives, but The Social Dilemma buries the substance in sensationalism. Rather than offer a nuanced look at technology, it gives a distorted view of how social media platforms work to create a convenient scapegoat for what are difficult and complex societal problems. What did you make of Facebook's statement there?
Listen, a lot of the things that Facebook put in this statement were quite misleading themselves. One of the things that made me crack up, they said that they do not compensate or reward their employees based on increasing the amount of time spent or engagement in user growth on Facebook's newsfeed. Of course they do. That's something they've become so good at over the last few years. So this is just really another aspect of their quite aggressive defensive PR campaign. You see a lot of executives of Facebook coming out to call out reporters on Twitter. I had just today Adam Mosseri say one of the things I was tweeting was wrong, and a bunch of Facebook employees liked his tweet. They're playing out these debates in the public sphere. Whenever criticism comes up, Facebook is more than happy to be vocal in response to that. And with the social dilemma, that's something that's really captured a lot of attention, I think in part because of the somewhat sensationalist way the documentary is framed. It ends up being a little bit more convincing for people who have those tendencies to believe that that kind of content on Facebook. So I don't know exactly what they were going for with that, but I think that it's meant to entertain as well as inform, clearly, just like the newsfeed.
Now, also over the weekend, Sarah, we got word that Facebook would be sending Mark Zuckerberg as well, along with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, to testify before the Senate. We also heard reporting on Facebook's position on breaking up Facebook, that was a non-starter for them. Quickly, what is the latest from Washington about the scrutiny and continuing scrutiny on Facebook from Congress?
The simplest way to explain it is that our leaders in Congress agree that something needs to be done about these social media platforms, but they don't agree on what that is. They have very different criticisms. I think the clearest line of thinking has come from the House Antitrust Committee, and we're expecting that report out this week. But we still have the FTC probes to look forward to. In that Section 230 hearing, I think that's one of the clearest examples of these divergent opinions. Conservatives thinking that Facebook and Twitter and Google are taking down too much. Liberals thinking that they're not doing enough to protect their users from harm.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer, who covers social media for us. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your reporting. Coming up, we're going to be taking a look at the IPO market and why so many tech companies are choosing to go public now, but is now still a good time? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. We knew Airbnb planned to go public later this year, and now a Reuters report puts that date in the month of December. But with markets volatile after the president's COVID diagnosis and a big election happening between now and then, it's unclear how long the ideal window to go public will stay open. For more on what awaits new companies coming to market, Jackie Kelly of Ernst & Young, the U.S. West Coast IPO and strategic transactions leader, is with us. Jackie, great to have you back on the show. So is Airbnb waiting until December a good idea, given all the things that have to happen between now and then?
You know, these markets have been quite turbulent, but I will tell you our IPO-bound companies are very resilient. We've got a huge backlog of tech companies in particular looking to list here over the next 6 months.
So we've had a number of companies come out of the gate, big IPOs, lots of big pops, sometimes maybe too big pops. I mean, do you think that markets will keep up for them?
Even looking at 2019, tech IPOs were up 100%, and that foundation really got us started this year. And despite the fact that we've had all the different sort of obstacles in our way, our tech companies and really the markets in general our clients have been fearless in getting access to capital. And the results are showing through. I mean, the performance is fantastic. IPOs are up, through the third quarter, over 36% off their offer price. So I think this momentum is going to continue.
Some Palantir investors have been a little frustrated by the company's direct listing. Would you advise Airbnb to not reinvent the wheel, to go the traditional IPO route, or should they be exploring some of these alternatives, given what we saw with Palantir?
Yeah, it's a very exciting time right now. I mean, there's so many ways to become a public company, so many more than flashback 6 months ago, really. And today, whether it's a traditional IPO, a direct listing, a special purpose acquisition company, acquiring one of these companies, or even counterbalance that with M&A activity, really. There's so many different ways to get access to capital, and really, companies today are looking at all of those options.
So what is your outlook for the rest of the year? It sounds to me like you're saying the window stays open, election or not.
Yeah, I think that, we're going to be pushing up to the elections, and frankly, the market, and especially the IPO markets, like certainty. So decisions made. I think historically we've seen great performance after elections, and that first quarter should be really robust. I'm very optimistic on the markets.
Robust or too robust? Any concerns about things being too frothy?
Yeah, the energy, I mean, it's amazing, right? Where we were a couple months ago and where we are today, and just the boom and the fact that we're getting, the volumes of IPO and SPAC activity happening on a weekly basis right now. But I would say the momentum, as long as the performance continues, that we're going to continue to see that activity here for several months.
Okay. Jackie Kelly of Ernst & Young. Jackie, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to have you. Okay, still ahead, we're taking a look at the health of the retail industry and one luxury marketplace that just scored a big partnership. That is next. This is Bloomberg. The Real, a marketplace for online consignment, had just opened a new brick-and-mortar store in San Francisco a week before the pandemic shut the city down. Since then, e-commerce and apparel sales have been on a roller coaster. Real shares plummeted at the start of the pandemic, but have since steadily been rising, closing up more than 8% today on the back of a new partnership with Gucci. Joining us now to discuss, Julie Wainwright, CEO of The Real. Julie, you and I last spoke in your San Francisco store, beautiful store, just opening for the very first time. 7 days later, it was closed due to the pandemic. Talk to us about the roller coaster this has been for you in terms of running both an online marketplace that had just been starting to expand to brick and mortar.
Well, gosh, everyone who has any kind of business has been through this, but we went from boom to we can't conduct business. And it was really hard in the state of California. The store that you and I sat in, literally, I think it was under a week that we had to shut it down. So it never got properly launched. So we had to shut our stores down. In California, we shut our operation centers down. And then we had to reinvent the business. So we started doing virtual consultations. Eventually, we did curbside pickups. But look, that was then, and we just had a nosedive in our business. But we're back, and the stores are open. In fact, we're excited that we're going to open another store in Chicago this quarter. So very exciting.
So having a brick and mortar presence is still a part of your strategy, because there's been some concern that physical retail will never be the same, will never recover, though online retail is a different story.
Look, we're committed to retail. And if you go to our stores now, putting San Francisco aside, there are lines outside waiting to get in because we're practicing all good social distancing and great COVID-free practices, but there are lines to get in. People still love shopping. They love creating an event. They love bringing their consignment. They love talking to our experts. So we're committed. We're committed to brick and mortar stores. Now, most of our business by far is online, but stores are an important part of our strategy.
Now, investors are clearly excited about this partnership with Gucci. That said, Gucci is a luxury brand. We're in a recession right now. You've got a lot of people who are suffering, who've lost their jobs. Can they really afford to buy Gucci and other things, even on the secondhand market? Why do you think this, how much do you think this is going to drive business for you?
Well, look, this is really about sustainability, and it's about making sure that we talk to the world, really, because Gucci's a worldwide brand, about the importance of recirculating goods and the power of consignment. So it really is more of a statement about this is a really good thing to do. If you buy something of quality like Gucci, and Gucci's still making sales worldwide and in the US, you should think about recirculating your old goods, and The RealReal should be your partner. But it is a dedication to sustainability. And when someone does either buy on The RealReal or consign, Gucci and The RealReal are planting a tree from one tree planted. So it's really a strong statement about the positive impact of consignment on the planet.
So what is your outlook for the holiday season? We just saw Amazon delay Prime Day to later this month, and I think you've got a lot of retailers just trying to figure out how to ride the waves that just seem to keep coming, for better or for worse.
Look, I would be a fool to forecast. Let me tell you how we're preparing. We're preparing for a really good holiday season because we may have one. I mean, the truth is, no one knows. March 1st, if you would have said we're going to shut down our brick and mortar stores and our luxury consignment offices for months, I would have said, why would we do that? So I would say we're preparing for a good one. We've seen a strong demand in our products, and I would expect that demand to accelerate during gift giving time. So we're ready, and if the market's there, we'll be able to fulfill those orders.
What is your vision then as we come out of the pandemic? We don't know exactly what normal is going to be. What is the new normal in the future that you see in terms of the amount of shopping that happens online and the amount that still is, getting out on the street and going into a real store? What's that balance?
Sure. I mean, that's also a difficult question, but look, the demise of retail happened before the pandemic. So it put even more pressure on more standard brick and mortar stores to reinvent themselves. And I think they will. I mean, people love to be social. They love to get out and do things that are different. Honestly, the lines outside The RealReal attest to people do want to go in a store. They want to see things. They want to have a social event. But I think it puts pressure on all retailers to do something different, engage your customer in a different way, and create more of a great living, changing environment to get them excited about shopping again. It's not impossible, but it was an industry under pressure before. COVID pushed it over the edge. And whenever that happens, it means it leaves the door open for innovation. And we've always been innovating. It gives us more opportunities to try new things too.
And last quick question, obviously, you've been working in Silicon Valley a long time, going back to pets.com and even before that. A lot of businesses have been suffering as a result of the pandemic, but you've seen Silicon Valley and the tech industry weather major crises. Do you think this crisis will be different for tech or no?
Oh, I think so. I mean, look, first of all, I believe in humans' ability to create and innovate. So we will be back. It'll look different. Personally, I'm worried at some of the tech companies who said we're going to be virtual for X number of years, or they've said another 2 years. I actually don't believe that's good for creativity, innovation, for people's really soul. Because when you work together and you collaborate, there is another entity in the room, and that's the collective mind. You don't get that the same over virtual. So we're looking forward to getting back as a company. We're not giving up our real estate space. But look, in times of great uncertainty and when things change, it always leaves opportunities for new businesses to really do well and for people to innovate. And that really is the human spirit.
All right, Julie Wainwright, CEO of The Real, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to have you here on the show. Julie, as we've been speaking, we've been getting some breaking news out of Apple. The company will stop selling Sonos, Logitech, and Bose audio accessories. These have been quite popular through Apple stores, through apple.com. But as Apple has been making more of its own devices, its own headphones, AirPods, for example, Apple now pulling back on those, that impacting shares after hours. And we're also standing by for the president to leave Walter Reed Hospital, scheduled to leave about 30 minutes from now. Stay with Bloomberg. We will be following his movements. Bloomberg Daybreak Australia is next. This is Bloomberg.